What's up everyone, welcome to another video. In this video, I will cover changing the front brake pads on a 2005 through 2013 Chevy Impala. I will be changing the front right in this video, so chalk the opposite wheel, which will be the rear left. First, break loose the lug nuts while it's sitting on the ground. Next, jack up the vehicle and support it with the jack stand. Never support it with just the floor jack, use a jack stand. Then, remove the lug nuts and remove the wheel. We will need to remove the two caliper bolts, one at the top of the caliper and one at the bottom of the caliper. Use a 13mm socket to break the two bolts loose, then remove them, and set them aside for later. Now the caliper is ready to remove. You may need a pry bar or a screwdriver to help pry it out of place. And after it's removed, it needs to be supported so it's not hanging by the brake hose. I personally like to use a metal coat hanger. Route it through the caliper and suspend it from something up above. In this particular case, I'm hanging it from a suspension coil. The weight of the caliper is supported by the coat hanger, and there is no weight on the brake hose. Next, remove the existing brake pads. There's one on the outside and one on the inside, and they slip out from the sides. This inside pad needed a little bit of help. I also recommend replacing the pad clips to ensure that the pads slide freely. They may come with your brake pads, or you can buy them in a separate brake pad hardware kit. Just pop out the old clips. If you don't want to buy new ones, you can clean up the existing ones with a wire brush. Clean up any surfaces with a scraper, wire brush, or whatever's needed so the new clips will fully seat. Then pop in the new clips, making sure they're pressed all the way down and all the surfaces are fully seated. And it should look like this, with no gaps. And do the same for the other clip. Next up is regreasing the caliper bolt guide pins. They are supposed to freely move left and right, so the caliper can float left and right during operation. However, these pins are stuck. They are frozen in place and won't budge. That is no good. That's why the inside brake pad is so worn. With the pins frozen, the pistons just use the inside brake pad, instead of the caliper floating and providing even pressure on both pads. And this will also wear the inside of the rotor unevenly. These pins should just slip right out, but I had to hammer them out since they were frozen. Hopefully you don't have this problem, so slide the pin and the rubber boot out of the caliper bracket. The pins have a rubber sleeve at the end to prevent rattling, and this is the cause of the pin seizing up. I would recommend using the rubber sleeve if possible, because that's how it was designed, but it's causing my brakes not to work properly, so I'm personally choosing to discard them. I would rather have working brakes than a possible rattle. If it's causing issues for you, removing it may be something to research and consider independently. Clean off the pin and apply new silicone grease. Then reinstall it into the caliper bracket. And make sure the lip on the rubber boot seats into the groove on the caliper bracket, and the pin should float freely. And repeat the process for the other pin. Remove it, clean it off, apply new silicone grease, and reinstall it. Both pins are re-greased and we are ready to continue. Next, install the new brake pads by sliding the ears into the brake pad clips. Make sure the pad is facing the rotor. Do not put them in backwards. And here's a close-up of the pads installed in the clips. Before installing the pads, it's often recommended to add grease on the ears where they contact the clips. I personally don't do it because it attracts dirt and debris and gums things up. I did not apply it in this video. With that pointed out, everything is looking good and we are ready to continue. With the new pads installed, we've added additional thickness to the pad and rotor stack-up. The caliper will no longer fit over it. The pistons need to be pushed in to make some room for the new pads. And I noticed the rubber boots are torn on both of the pistons. That is not acceptable. I'll have to come back in here later and fix it. And when you push the pistons in, the brake fluid level in the reservoir will rise. And technically, it's possible for it to overflow, and you may need to siphon some out. I've never experienced that extreme, but check the fluid level. But continuing on, place an old brake pad on the pistons. And use a C-clamp to push the pistons back into the caliper. Now there's enough room to install the caliper back over the thicker brake pads. If the brake fluid cap is off, don't forget to put it back on. Next, clean up the surfaces that will be in contact with the back of the brake pads, and apply a thin layer of silicone grease to those surfaces. Now it's time to reinstall the brake caliper. Remove the coat hanger or whatever you use to hang it. Then, set the caliper back in position over the pads. You may need to push the guide pins in a little for it to drop down and sit all the way down. And reinstall the two caliper pin bolts to secure it in place. You'll probably need to jiggle the caliper around to get them started. And torque them to 26 foot-pounds. and the caliper should float linearly on the pins. Reinstall the wheel, tightening the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds, and lower the vehicle. And don't forget to remove the wheel chocks. Then, before you drive anywhere, start the vehicle and press the brake several times to push the pistons in the calipers back out to operating position. Otherwise, if you go driving right away, your foot will go to the floor and you will not stop when you press the brakes. Then, do a safe little test drive to make sure the brakes are working properly. All good here. So, that wraps this up. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.